Now, there is one more very interesting aspect of this pyramid. People often ask me, how old are the pyramids? Well, by the usually accepted chronology, these pyramids were built about 2600 BC. But if we accept the biblical chronology, it means that the universal flood occurred about 2300 BC. Now that means that this pyramid would have to be later than that. In fact, according to Dr. Emanuel Velikovsky's revised chronology, it would place it about the 19th century BC, and that would be about the time that Abraham visited Egypt. You know, you have the record in the book of Genesis of Abraham coming down here to Egypt and talking with the Pharaoh and so forth. Now remember where Abraham came from. He came from Ur of the Chaldees. And Sir Leonard Woolley's excavations there from 1922 to 1934 revealed that the Sumerian civilization was the world's first civilization. And they had a remarkable understanding of mathematics and astronomy and trigonometry and other sciences. Well now, Josephus, the Jewish historian, made a very interesting statement, and I want you to listen to what that statement says.
Abraham communicated to them, that is the Egyptians, arithmetic, and delivered to them the science of astronomy. For before Abraham came into Egypt, they were unacquainted with those parts of learning, for that science came from the Chaldeans into Egypt.
So, if that is correct, and Abraham came here during the time of Khufu, that would explain something very interesting. You see, this pyramid is exactly square. It is exactly level. It is exactly orientated north, south, east and west. And if you were to take a circle with the top of the pyramid as the center of the circle and apply the formula 2 pi r, you would find that that would be the exact circumference of the base of the pyramid. Well now, either that's a remarkable coincidence or it means that the Egyptians at this time knew the formula 2 pi r. And where did they get it from? Well, if Abraham imparted to them this knowledge, that would explain it all. And so it raises the interesting possibility that the Egyptians may indeed, as Josephus says, have learned their astronomy and their mathematics from Abraham, who brought it from Ur of the Chaldees. Well, Khufu was followed by Khafre, or to give him his Greek name, Khephren. And he built this next pyramid, not quite as big as the preceding one, but it's still a big beauty, isn't it? And the interesting part of this pyramid is right up at the top, do you see it, is still part of the stone facing that originally covered both pyramids. Tura limestone, beautiful white glistening limestone it was. Well, most of it is gone, taken by the stone robbers actually, but there's that little bit still left up the top there to enable us to know just what these pyramids looked like when they were finished. Now, Khafre had an interesting system. He wanted to stay there forever. He wanted his body to be preserved forever. And so he devised an idea to guarantee that no tomb robbers would ever get into his tomb. Well, this was his idea. He had a sphinx made here. It was cut out of the solid rock. You see that knoll over there? Well, there was one like that here, and they cut the stone away from it and left this sphinx standing, a human face and a lion's body. It's 73 meters long and 20 meters high, and it has the face of Khafre, so we know it was meant to be guarding his tomb. But it didn't do a very good job, because his tomb was robbed anyway by the tomb robbers. So we leave the pyramid of Khafre and we go to the next pyramid, which is a lot smaller, and that was the pyramid of Menkaure, or to give him his Greek name, Mycerinus. It's a lot smaller, only about a quarter of the size of the preceding one, but the interesting part about this pyramid is that it was covered not with white Tura limestone, but with this beautiful pink granite that was floated down the River Nile, nearly 1,000 kilometres from Aswan. And this covered nearly half of the bottom of the pyramid. Most of it has fallen down, of course. But let's have a look at the top of this pyramid. It's rather interesting. Here we are at the top, and believe me, it's a long way up, but it's worth it. Away out over there are the pyramids of Abu Sir. Now, they're the pyramids of the pharaohs of the 5th dynasty. They're in very bad shape. They have crumbled right down. But in particular, I want to tell you about the last king of the 5th dynasty, whose name was Unas. So here we are at the Pyramid of Unas over there. It's in rather poor condition. All the outside stone is gone, but the inside is interesting. There's a new development here. Let's go down and have a look. Well, we're a long way below ground level here, but Unas wanted his soul to have the impression that he was underneath the night sky, and so he had all these stars painted on the roof of his tomb chamber. As well as the stars on the roof, there's another very important feature here, and that is the introduction of these beautiful hieroglyphic texts in a tomb for the first time. Now, up until 1822, nobody could read these texts. But then came the Rosetta Stone. In 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte's forces crossed the Mediterranean and he occupied Egypt. Soon after, one of his officers was rebuilding a fort at a place called Rashid in the Delta, now known as Rosetta, and he found there a strange stone, which he sent up to Cairo. Subsequently, the British occupied Egypt and confiscated the stone. So the Rosetta Stone is now in the British Museum, and as you can see, it is in 3 different scripts. It was a French genius by the name of Champollion who was ultimately able to announce that he was able to decipher the Egyptian hieroglyphs in the year 1822. The way he was able to do it was from this Rosetta Stone. At the top, there is the Egyptian ancient hieroglyph pictorial writing. Beneath that, in the center, is the Demotic, which is also the Egyptian language, but in a cursive script. And down below here is the same message in the Greek script and language. Now, this could be read, the Greek could be read, and so by comparing this with the Demotic and then with the hieroglyphs, ultimately Champollion was able to announce that he could interpret the hieroglyphs. So now the Egyptologists can read these beautiful hieroglyphic texts, and the result is some very interesting light on a biblical story. Behind me is a hill on which once stood the ancient city of Dothan, and it was in this vicinity that one of those stories which is sometimes stranger than fiction took place. It was the story of Joseph, the son of Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, and one of them was Joseph. The second youngest was Joseph. And Joseph was a very good boy. Jacob loved him very much, but he made the fatal mistake of showing favoritism towards this son. And he even made him what the Bible calls a coat of many colors. Actually, that's not a good translation. It should be a coat with long sleeves. Do you know why? Because if you had long sleeves, that meant that you weren't expected to do any manual work. Well, the other brothers, of course, had to go out and do their work. And one day they left the home and went out with their flocks to Shechem. And after they were away for a while, their father got a bit anxious and said to Joseph, "You better go and see how they're getting on." So Joseph went. Now, Joseph had had some dreams in which he dreamed that sheaves from a wheat field like this were bowing down. 11 of them were bowing down and worshipping him. And, of course, the brothers interpreted this as meaning that one day they would bow down to him. And, of course, they didn't like that. And they resented this, you see. Well, when Joseph came to Shechem, he found that the brothers had already left, and they told him they'd gone on to Dothan. So that means they came onto this place here. And when the brothers saw Joseph coming, they said, "Aha, here comes that dreamer. Now listen, let's kill him, and then let us see what happens to his dreams." And so they all thought that was a good idea, and so when poor unsuspecting Joseph came, they grabbed hold of him. But Reuben, the oldest of the brothers, didn't want to have to go back to his father and tell this story, and so he said, listen, don't let's kill him, let us throw him into this pit, referring to a nearby cistern. This well is at the foot of the hill on which Dothan is built. The stones up near the top are of fairly recent origin, but those stones down the bottom are very old. Well, it is possible that into this pit, which was dry at the time, Joseph was lowered with the intention of leaving him there by the brothers. However, after a while, Judah came along and he said, look, why don't we make a quick shekel out of this? And a caravan of camels was coming along, and he said, let's sell him as a slave. Well, these Midianite traders took Joseph down to Egypt, and there they sold him to an officer by the name of Potiphar. Apparently Joseph decided if he was going to be a slave, he might as well be a good one, and he was so reliable that Potiphar promoted him to be the head over his household. Unfortunately for Joseph, there was some false accusation made against him, and he was flung into prison. Well, while he was in prison there, the two servants of Pharaoh, a butler and a baker, were also flung into prison, and one day Joseph came along and he found them looking very disconsolate. And he said, what's your problem? Well, the butler said, we've had some dreams and we don't know what the meaning is. Oh, Joseph said, tell me, I'll tell you the meaning. God knows the meaning. So the butler said, well, I dreamed that I had 3 bunches of grapes and I squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup. Well, Joseph said, that's easy. It simply means that after 3 days you're going to be restored as Pharaoh's butler to squeeze the grapes into his cup. Well, when the baker heard that, he thought, that's pretty good. And he said, well, I dreamed that I had 3 baskets of bread on my head. And the birds came and ate up the bread. Joseph said, that means that after 3 days you're going to lose your head. Well, it happened just exactly as Joseph had predicted. And when the butler was restored, Joseph said, hey, just remember me when you get out because I shouldn't be in here. But unfortunately, the butler completely forgot about it, and it wasn't until about 2 years later that Pharaoh had a dream. And he did not know the meaning, called in the wise men, they couldn't tell him. And it was then that the butler suddenly remembered, oh yes, I remember that fellow in prison. So he told Pharaoh about it, and so Pharaoh said, well, bring him here. And so Joseph was brought in, and Pharaoh told him the dream. He said, I dreamed that there were 7 fat cows came up out of the river Nile, and they grazed there. And then 7 thin cows, so thin you couldn't believe it, came up, and they gobbled up the 7 fat cows. Well, Joseph said, I'll tell you what that means. It means that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, and that will be followed by 7 years of famine. The Nile is going to stop flowing just about, and there'll be a famine. So you better gather together, appoint somebody to gather together all the grain during those 7 years of plenty, so that when the 7 years of famine comes, you'll have enough to eat. And so Pharaoh said, well, that's a good idea, and what better person could we have to do all this than Joseph? And so Joseph was appointed as the vizier of Egypt. Now the question is, who was this Pharaoh? Which one? I personally consider that the chronology of Egypt needs to be shortened, and in that case, this incident would take place at the beginning of the 12th dynasty of Egypt. And in particular, the Pharaoh concerned would be the Pharaoh called Sesostris I. And I think I have some good reasons for thinking that. This is a statue of Sesostris I. Actually, he's quite a nice-looking guy, don't you think? Almost a smile on his face. And there's another group of statues in the Cairo Museum. They're clustered around a shrine. There's 10 statues altogether, and they're all identical. And they show him also as a nice-looking fellow. And there's another statue that shows him as a shepherd with a shepherd's crook in his hand. In other words, he was looking after his people. He had an interest in his people. Now, he was the one who made this obelisk over here, and it has inscriptions on all 4 sides. They're all identical, and this was the first large obelisk that was ever made. Now, it is called the Pillar of On, and the biblical record says that Joseph married the daughter of the priest of On, and that fits right in this place here. And so I would identify Sesostris I as the pharaoh under whom Joseph was promoted to be vizier. Now, there is something else. The biblical record indicates that Joseph was a very prominent figure. I'd like you to listen to what the biblical record says in the book of Genesis.